Monday morning. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Zinklea Samoa in for Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, snow wave. This morning, millions of Americans waking up to wild winter weather, from fresh powder and freezing temperatures in a normally sunny California to intense winds in Texas and severe snowstorms in New England. We'll bring you the latest as fast-moving storm barrels east, plus what to expect where you live. Also this morning, questions of credibility in the double murder trial of Murdaugh after a tense exchange between prosecutors and Murdaugh himself over what he says happened the night his wife and youngest son were killed.
I checked Maggie and Paul before I called 911.
That's correct.
No, sir. That's not accurate. At least that's not what I remember.
That's not what you remember saying, or that's not what you say now happens?
No, that's not what I believe happened.
We'll have more from his cross-examination and what to expect in court today. Origin story. This morning, new intelligence in the investigation into the COVID-19 pandemic. A government report now raising new questions about the possible source of the virus, what NBC News has learned about the findings, and how China's government is responding this morning. And empowerment through education. We'll introduce you to a first-of-its-kind team of teachers in Philadelphia, leading by example to support students of color in school. A cool way to end Black History Month.
Exactly. Rahima Ellis will bring us that great story.
But we begin this morning with the latest on a powerful storm system that's sweeping across the country, leaving a path of destruction in its wake.
Thousands of people in California are still without power after several feet of snow fell in the northern part of the state, closing roads and leaving people stranded.
And there's just so much snow. I've never seen this much snow come down this long, this hard since 31 years.
And overnight, tornadoes touched down across Oklahoma and Kansas, destroying homes, flipping cars, and knocking out power to thousands of residents. So what's next for this powerful storm as it makes its way east? Let's bring in meteorologist Michelle Grossman now for the latest on this. Michelle, good morning.
Good morning to you both, and we're going to see much of the same. We're going to see some rain, freezing rain, some really gusty winds, so we could see some power outages as well, and also looking at the chance of snow, and that includes New York City. So as we wake up on this Monday morning and get out the door, we're looking at 56 million people impacted by winter alerts. We have winter storm watches, winter storm warnings, even a blizzard warning in parts of California. So these alerts stretch from the west all the way to the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes, into the Northeast, and we are looking at accumulating snow in some spots. Wind alerts as well, 60 million people impacted, again, stretching from the west through the middle of the country into parts of the east as well, where you see the blue, that is a wind advisory. A high wind warning is in the purple. So as we go throughout time here, this is what we're looking at in terms of radar right now. We're looking at a severe weather threat as we go throughout the day, not quite as strong as yesterday. That is decreasing, but still 6 million people impacted by the threat of severe weather. You could see with this where this area of low pressure is at spin, and we're looking at heavy rain. That's where you see the brighter colors. Now starting to see some purple and pink right at the north end of that storm, the colder part of that storm. That's because we're looking at some sleet, some freezing rain, and that certainly could happen in the Northeast as well, especially in New York City. So this is what it looks like as we go throughout time here. We're looking at snow and ice stretching across the Great Lakes and the Northeast. So we have a pair of areas of low pressure. They're going to team up together, and that's going to bring us the wintry weather. And then on the warmer side, we're looking at the threat for severe weather across Illinois, Indiana, also Ohio. The main threat with that would be damaging winds, but certainly could see a few tornadoes as well. This is going to linger into the early part of tomorrow, and portions of the Northeast. Notice all that blue in New England. By tomorrow, this is 8 o'clock tomorrow, still seeing 8 p.m., still seeing some snow falling in portions of northern New England, but it's going to be a blustery day too. Wind working in on the backside of the system with winds gusting up to 45 miles per hour. So how much snow? This is what we want to know in a rather snowless winter in the Northeast. We could see 2 to 5 inches in New York City. That includes the threat for sleet mixing in as well. 48 in Hartford, 4 to 8 also in Albany, 2 to 4 in Boston, and 4 to 6 inches in Augusta. Now, we're also concerned about some ice, so it's going to be a tricky travel in portions of the Great Lakes, the Midwest, even portions of the Northeast as well through Tuesday. We could see up to a 1/4 inch of ice possible. That creates a lot of problems on the roadways. It creates problems with bringing trees down and limbs down in terms of power outages. And then as far as the severe weather threat, 15 million people impacted, winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour. Could see a few tornadoes and a hail risk. Although it's low, we could see some hail. We had a lot of hail yesterday with the storms and the southern plains, but where you see the yellow, that includes Indianapolis, also Cincinnati is where we're expecting that severe threat. Back to you guys.
All right, Michelle, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Now to the latest developments in the Alec Murdaugh murder trial. The disbarred South Carolina attorney is accused of murdering his wife, Margaret, and their younger son, Paul.
On Friday, Murdaugh wrapped his second day of testimony and faced tough questioning from prosecutors. They accused Murdaugh of fudging the timeline around the key moments when the attacks allegedly happened.
How do you remember so much detail about everything else, but you don't remember what you were specifically doing to generate 283 steps while you're making all these phone calls in the same 4-minute period?
I remember unequivocally, without any doubt, with as clear a mind as I could have at any time, that I never manufactured any alibi in any way, shape, or form, because I did not and would not hurt my wife and my child.
The trial is now in its 6th week. The defense is expected to wrap its case soon, which means Murdaugh's fate will be left to the jury. We have NBC News correspondent Katie Beck and NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos here to break it all down. Katie, let's start with you there on the ground. Can you just recap for us what's been happening? What were the main takeaways in court on Friday from Murdaugh's second day of testimony?
Yeah, sure. It was an absolutely shocking, explosive decision for him to take the stand. And then even more shocking, when minutes into his testimony, he admits that he lied to investigators. Now, on cross-examination, prosecutors on Friday really laid into that. They really scrutinized that timeline, grilling Murdaugh about the inconsistent statements he made to investigators, everything from whether or not he took a shower, the fact that he said he was never at the kennels, now saying he was. And then in that soundbite that you just heard, the phone calls. He was sort of frantically tracking 70 steps a minute, minutes after these murders, and was on the phone making calls. He didn't really come up with a great explanation for why that was. So Murdaugh on the stand on day 2 was looking a bit more unsteady than on day 1. We saw a lot of emotion from him on the first day, a lot of personal detail, a lot of sort of turning and appealing to the jury. On the second day, a more combative, more aggressive Murdaugh, really pushing back on those cross-examination sort of inconsistencies that the prosecution was bringing up. So their main goal, I'd say, in this prosecution's case on Friday was to say to the jury, he's lied and lied and lied, and he does it with ease. Here's a little bit of that questioning.
Did you lie to him about the last time you saw your wife and son alive?
I did.
Did you lie to their wives?
I'm sure I did.
Did you lie to your law partners?
I did.
Did you lie to them about the kennels?
Some of them.
Again, a lot of the line of questioning on Friday was to sort of solidify to the jury. He looks at people in the eye, he lies easily, he manufactures stories, and he admits to that on the stand. But he still maintains he did not kill his wife and son.
So, Danny, from your point of view, how did Murdaugh do as a witness overall? Did he help his case or did he hurt his case by taking the stand?
Awful to really awful. I mean, let's take a step back and realize that the only reason to put him on the stand is to get a fact out that you simply can't get from any other witness. That's what makes it worth, if ever, putting your client on the stand. And what does he do? He gets up there and his explanation is that I was lying. So now he's got additional credibility problems. I think he did terribly. In talking to other folks, there are people who are on the fence. Some think, well, maybe, he did explain a little of what happened. I don't agree. I think this was really problematic. It only built on all the lies he's told, and nothing took away from the fact that he was the only one there. He had access to a firearm, and he's a massive drug addict, possibly going through withdrawals. I've known a lot of cases, a lot less facts. Conviction happens.
So, Katie, we got to ask, it's a new week. Court resumes this morning. What can we expect?
Well, the defense says they have 4 more witnesses to call, and then the prosecutors, there'll be a brief rebuttal period for them. They say it won't take long. So we're expecting that there'll be closing arguments mid to late week. I think Thursday is about right. They're saying maybe Wednesday. I think that's a little ambitious. But basically, the jury will soon have this mountain of evidence to consider, and they're going to have to decide which version of this very twisted story they believe. There's been a lot of sort of theories floated out there. As Danny mentioned, was it drug-related? Was that part of what fueled this? Was it the sympathy distraction angle that the prosecution has laid out? I'm not sure that there is one clear overriding theory that the jury has right now. Hopefully, in closing arguments, they take all those dots they planted and they connect them, because that's kind of what they need to get through to the jury at this point. I think there's, like I said, a lot of ideas about what happened, but in my mind, there's not a clear story that's been presented on either side.
And Danny, that's really the prosecution's job here. Real quickly, they got to connect those dots. What's their strategy, do you think, for the closing argument here?
Look for the state to pivot away subtly, not obviously, pivot away from their whole distraction from financial crimes theory. They probably got Twitter, just like we do. They probably realized this is not working for us. It's a distraction itself from their otherwise, I think, decent circumstantial case. So look for them to pivot away from that and say, well, yeah, he had financial crimes. But look, he's the only one there, and he lied about being there minutes before, and he is a massive liar and a drug addict. Who knows why he did it? Maybe it was the financial crimes, but the bottom line is the evidence doesn't lie. He was there. The evidence tells us that. The evidence doesn't lie. The only liar here is Murdaugh. Something like that. How'd I do?
Well, that's the jury. We'll see.
We'll find out.
What the prosecution does.
We will find out.
Yeah.
Danny Zavalos, Katie Beck, thank you both so much.
This morning, as the war in Ukraine enters its second year, the U.S. is warning China against sending military support to Russia. NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin has more on that as fighting intensifies in eastern Ukraine.
In the frontline town of Volhodar, Ukrainian troops are defiant. Ukrainians don't have another option but to win, this soldier says. This haunting video released by the Russians shows what remains of the area around Bakhmut, a chilling sign that neither side is backing down. In an interview that aired Sunday, President Putin telling Russian state TV, the West has one goal, to disband the former Soviet Union and its fundamental part, the Russian Federation. As the U.S. ramps up its warnings on China, 3 U.S. officials familiar with the matter telling NBC News China is considering sending artillery and ammunition to Russia, allegations China denies.
Well, we're confident that the Chinese leadership is considering the provision of lethal equipment.
President Zelensky vowing to liberate Russian-occupied Crimea and return the Ukrainian flag to every corner of Ukraine, while the U.S. reiterated its support.
It's for the United States to support Ukraine on the battlefield so that they can achieve the victory that they define. That's what we are determined to do.
Ukrainian officials insist Crimea can be freed.
Is it realistic, though, for Ukraine to take back Crimea, given that the Russians are thoroughly entrenched in Crimea?
Did it look realistic that in a year Russia wouldn't achieve any military results and lose dozens of thousands of its troops? That's why when I'm asked whether something is realistic, I say undoubtedly.
Determination that's echoed on the Ukrainian front line. This is war. Some retreat, some advance, this soldier says. But I have no worries. I believe in our victory to the last.
The director of the CIA says that so far they have seen no evidence that China has given lethal aid to Russia and no evidence that China has made a final decision. Back to you.
All right, Aaron, thank you.
Staying with the war in Ukraine, just yesterday, that issue of China considering to supply lethal aid to Russia was brought up with White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan on Meet the Press yesterday. Here's a portion of that conversation with moderator Chuck Todd.
As the war in Ukraine enters year 2, this week on Meet the Press, I spoke with the National Security Advisor to President Biden, Jake Sullivan, about the Biden administration's support to Ukraine and the intelligence that they've been citing, suggesting that China is considering sending lethal aid to Russia. Take a look at what he had to say.
I don't think it is in China's interest to do this. I think it would alienate them from a number of countries in the world, including our European allies, and it would put them foursquare into the center of responsibility for the kinds of war crimes and bombardments of civilians and atrocities that the Russians are committing in Ukraine. Their weapons would, in effect, be used for the slaughter of people in Ukraine. So I think it would be ill-advised for China to move forward, but of course that's a decision Beijing is going to have to make for itself.
I understand you say the F-16s are not something they need right now. But to Congressman Golden's point, why not start training Ukrainians on this now so that when we inevitably do this, or likely do it, they're ready to use them?
Well, first, Chuck, it's important for people to understand that Ukrainian pilots are currently flying day in and day out. They are flying their Soviet-era fighters, MiG fighters, Sukhois, and the assessment of our military commanders, those giving advice to President Biden, are that what they need right now are tanks and armored personnel carriers and infantry fighting vehicles, artillery, and air defense systems up there on the front line. That's what we're giving them, and we're giving it to them fast. We're giving it to them in large quantities. And the question of F-16s is really a question for another day, for another phase. This phase is about ground combat and being able to have the tools in the hands of the Ukrainians to take the territory back that the Russians are occupying.
You can see my full interview and a lot more of Meet the Press at meetthepress.com. You can also get more Meet the Press right here on NBC News Now every weekday at 4 p.m. I'll see you then.
Chuck Todd, thank you so much.
Let's get more on this with NBC News White House correspondent Carol Lee. So, Carol, walk us through what U.S. intelligence is alleging about China and Russia here. What has NBC News learned?
Well, what U.S. officials are saying is that there's intelligence that says China is considering supplying Russia with lethal aid, specifically artillery and ammunition, which is something that Russia very, very much needs. So they're saying that this is something that hasn't happened yet, that China hasn't made a final decision on this yet, but that it's something they've been talking about and considering. And the reason they're putting this out there, Joe, is because they're trying to deter China from taking that step. And so by publicly shaming them in advance, the hope within the administration is that it will stop China from doing that. Now, it's really worth pointing out here that the U.S. has not disclosed how they know this, what evidence they have to back this up. They're simply saying they have intelligence that says China could do this, and they don't want China to do that. So they're coming out and saying that they have this intelligence.
So first of all, what has been Beijing's response to these accusations? And then if China does end up supplying lethal aid, how could the Biden administration respond?
Well, China has denied this. They've said that the U.S. is basically putting out disinformation about China's intentions. There's a spokesperson for the foreign minister in China said that the U.S. is fanning the flames, accusing the U.S. of essentially a double standard, saying the U.S. is the one who's fueling this fight in Ukraine and by providing weapons to the Ukrainians, and calling this, quote, the very definition of hypocrisy. As for the U.S. response, President Biden was asked this question and said that he's not going to publicly disclose what he might do if China were to take this step. But what U.S. officials are saying, and what we've seen in previous instances where countries have sided with Russia in this war, is that the U.S. has adopted sanctions against them. So you could see the U.S. taking a step like that. That would be likely. However, the U.S. sanctioning Russia, for instance, is very different than the U.S. sanctioning China. We have a much closer economic relationship with China, and so the blowback on the U.S. economy could be much more detrimental than, say, the U.S. sanctions on Russia.
A more complicated situation for sure. Carol, while I have you, I want to discuss another major headline that is related to China. NBC News has learned new details about the potential origins of COVID-19. So help us understand exactly what's being alleged here, where this information is coming from, and then what all sides are saying about it.
Sure. So this is a classified intelligence report by the Department of Energy that was briefed to the White House and members of Congress that says that the Department of Energy believes that the COVID-19 pandemic likely came from a leak, unintentional, from the lab in Wuhan, China. Now, they're also saying that there's low confidence of this, meaning that they think that this is what happened, but they don't have the sort of evidence that would give them high confidence. This is significant in the sense that this is another agency that has come out and said that they're leaning towards the Wuhan lab theory, which has been a sort of fringe theory in the past, and siding with, say, the FBI, who also has said that they likely believe that that's what happened. But they're still very inconclusive here. This is not something that all the intelligence agencies agreed on. In fact, most of them disagree on this. But this is something that you can bet is going to be part of investigations in Congress where there's a real desire to get to the bottom of where this came from.
All right, Carol Lee, thank you so much.
Now to the latest on the health threat to an Ohio community after a train derailment involving hazardous material earlier this month. Officials announced that contaminated waste from the site is being shipped to other parts of Ohio today. NBC News correspondent George Solis has the latest from East Palestine.
The EPA now says that cleanup and disposal operations at the train derailment site will resume, this after temporarily halting operations. The two new sites vetted by the EPA are here in Ohio. Meanwhile, frustrations from residents continues to grow 3 weeks after the derailment. The residents of East Palestine, Ohio, again left swimming in a sea of doubt.
Who can you really believe, you know?
Health and safety concerns still rampant more than 3 weeks after the Norfolk Southern toxic train derailment.
We had eyes burning. I couldn't stop sneezing for a half an hour.
Federal authorities announcing the shipment of contaminated waste from the site would resume to 2 new locations in Ohio.
All of this is great news for the people of East Palestine and the surrounding community, because it means the cleanup can continue at a rapid pace.
This latest development comes after officials announced they were halting shipments of the toxic train waste to 2 EPA-approved disposal sites in Michigan and 1 in Texas. Will that continue in any capacity? Is that material being vetted?
That material was already vetted. They are not currently accepting any more.
Still, Wayne County, Michigan Executive Warren Evans saying he felt blindsided by last week's arrival of tons of contaminated soil and water.
The outward effect of it looks like we're being sandbagged.
Okay. East Palestine residents stocked up on cases of free bottled water. Caravans rolling into town with other giveaways, including air filters.
How many's in your household? There's 4 of us.
Meanwhile, federal agencies say outreach efforts to address residents' concerns will continue. Some here left wondering if their town will ever recover.
I've got mixed emotions about all the publicity, but by the same token, if we don't have the publicity, who's going to hold Norfolk's feet to the iron?
The Ohio EPA says they'll be installing a number of water monitoring wells at the train derailment site to see if there is contamination. Meanwhile, there are 11 rail cars that remain on site. Those cars that remain are part of the ongoing NTSB investigation. Back to you.
George, thanks so much.
We're back now with the latest on escalating violence in the Middle East. Overnight, a Palestinian gunman killed 2 Israeli brothers as they were driving in the occupied West Bank. That sparked violent attacks by several hundred Israeli settlers.
NBC News foreign correspondent Molly Hunter has been following the developments and joins us now with the latest. Good morning, Molly. So can you set the scene for us and tell us exactly what has happened here?
Yeah, Zinkley, Joe, good morning to both of you. It was an incredibly violent night. So to set the scene, the violence that we are talking about, and I think we have verified video to show our audience of it, is in a town, a Palestinian town called Hawara. It is just south of Nablus in the occupied West Bank. Of course, Nablus, the site in the middle of the West Bank where we saw that deadly raid and those deadly protests last week. Now, verified video shows hundreds of Israeli settlers rampaging. That's the word a lot of Israeli media and a lot of the reports are using this morning, burning buildings, torching cars. Now, this was in response, in retaliation, according to Israeli settlers, for a Palestinian gunman who opened fire at a checkpoint nearby between the settlement and the Palestinian village, killing 2 Israeli brothers. They were both settlers. Now, an Israeli defense official, you guys just briefed international media, so we have a little bit more information. They say hundreds of reservists are now reinforcing the area, the entire area really now locked down in full control of the Israeli military. They also say there is now a manhunt going on for the Palestinian gunmen who killed the 2 Israelis, and in response to the violence by those hundreds, those huge crowds of Israeli settlers, the Israeli defense official says those were terror acts. They arrested 10 Israelis. Now, there was at least 1 Palestinian killed last night in that violence, and this Israeli defense official tells media they are also searching for the perpetrator who committed that act.
So, Molly, I mean, looking at what happened to this Palestinian neighborhood, anything else you can tell us about the damage to homes and cars in the area?
Yeah, the videos are pretty shocking, and we have some aerial footage that we've seen showing almost 30 buildings, homes that have been torched, dozens of cars that are torched. Now, according to the Palestinian Red Cross, more than 390 people were injured. At least 3 ambulances were attacked on their way in, trying to get to the injured. The other number they're offering up is that at least 95 people were injured with tear gas. Now, Palestinian officials spoke about that 1 victim, at least 1 one person has died, a 37-year-old man. And the Israeli defense official who briefed international media earlier today did say that the Israeli military was not involved in that shooting. What's interesting, though, talking to Palestinian officials this morning, is they are blaming the Israeli military, who have full control over that area in the occupied West Bank, for not stepping in and stopping this violence.
And Molly, notably, this all happened as Israeli and Palestinian officials were meeting in Jordan and pledged to de-escalate surging violence. Briefly, how did that meeting go, and does this latest round of violence affect those negotiations?
Yeah, it could be a pretty brief answer because there wasn't that much actually that came out of this. The important part is that it is very rare to have security officials from the Israeli side and the Palestinian side. And of course, look, Egyptian and Jordanian and U.S. officials were also present. But it is very rare to have those two sides meeting at this level, at that security level. They met in Aqaba in southern Jordan. The big takeaway, at least for Palestinians, was that Israeli officials announced a settlement freeze to pause building new settlements for at least 6 months. Though what happened immediately after, though, is that right-wing extremists, members of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition, almost immediately said, we weren't involved in these discussions. We did not agree to this. This is not something that we will abide by. You guys, what we are waiting to hear from Prime Minister Netanyahu is any kind of real conciliatory language, any kind of language that may tamp down violence, that may kind of rein in his coalition. And we have not heard that yet. Guys, I'll send it back to you.
Molly Hunter, thank you so much.
More international headlines now. Breaking news this morning. Another deadly earthquake has struck Turkey.
Matt Bradley joins us now from London with the latest on that and more. Good morning, Matt.
Good morning, guys. So, yeah, that earthquake, yet another one. It was about 5.6 on the Richter scale, and this time it's killed at least one person and caused several more buildings to collapse, and this, according to the Associated Press. Now, this comes as the death toll from those twin earthquakes in Turkey 3 weeks ago continues to climb. Now it's past 50,000. But Turkish prosecutors are also arresting a number of developers and contractors, blaming them for some of the thousands of buildings. There are about 16,000 of them that collapsed. So in the 3 weeks since that massive earthquake, the Turkish government has detained 200 people around that and are investigating more than 600 people who they say are suspects. Now, also some grim news out of the Mediterranean this morning. Rescuers have pulled at least 60 bodies from the Mediterranean Sea after a wooden boat full of migrants was wrecked on the rocky coast, according to the Associated Press. Now, authorities said dozens more are still missing, and the death toll could surpass 100 people. And that's because survivors said about 200 people were aboard the boat when it took off from Turkey, and only about 80 have so far been rescued alive. You know, more and more migrants have been making this perilous journey, and Italy's Interior Ministry said migrant arrivals via Turkey last year were up about 50% over the year before. So now, before I leave you, from South Korea, the second member of the hugely famous boy band BTS has begun the enlistment process for the mandatory military service that all able-bodied young South Korean men must complete. Now, 29-year-old J-Hope, whose real name is Jung Ho-sok, just applied to end the postponement of his military service. That basically means that he's going to be enlisting. Now, BTS is the only K-pop group that has ever been nominated for a Granny, and that's one of the reasons why fans and some lawmakers have been pushing to classify the band's members, along with international athletes and classical musicians, whose military obligations are very much reduced. But now it looks like this boy band are going to be enlisting. Guys?
All right, Matt Bradley. Matt, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We're back now with the latest on the controversy surrounding the University of Alabama men's basketball team.
That's right. Freshman Brandon Miller is facing backlash this morning after playing in this weekend's game against Arkansas. That's because police say Miller may have played a role in the fatal shooting of a 23-year-old woman back in January. Miller is not a suspect in this case and has not been charged with a crime by prosecutors. Investigators say Miller allegedly brought the gun to his former teammate, Darius Miles, before a third man, Michael Davis, pulled the trigger. Detectives say Miles texted Miller to bring him the weapon before alerting Davis where to find the gun. Police say the gun belonged to Miles, who was kicked off the team. Miles and Davis are both charged with capital murder and are both claiming self-defense. Their requests to be released on bond have been denied. A grand jury has been convened to determine whether Miles or Davis should be indicted. In a statement, Miller's attorney said, quote, Brandon never touched the gun, was not involved in its exchange to Mr. Davis in any way, and never knew that illegal activity involved involving the gun would occur.
So for the latest, we are joined now by NBC Sports host and reporter Corey Robinson. Corey, good to have you with us this morning. So let's start with sort of the controversy surrounding this, the fact that Miller's still able to take part in games right now after this connection incident. That's causing a lot of problems for some folks, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, because you're talking about murder. This is like a very serious, tragic situation, and his association isn't really necessarily clear at this point, because we knew he was there when the shooting started. Allegedly, he left right when the shooting started. His attorney has stated, Jim Standridge has stated that, look, Miles texted him, said bring the gun, but apparently when he got there, he did not see the gun, did not touch the gun, did not do anything about that. That was the new information that the University of Alabama Athletic Department said, okay, well, it's clear for him to play. But at this stage, in this moment, we don't know. New information keeps coming out, and we don't necessarily know if he will become a suspect.
And Corey, we heard from Alabama coach Nate Oates last week. So first, let's take a listen, and we'll talk on the other side.
The whole team understands how tragic and serious this situation that we're dealing with is since day one, really, that first meeting.
You said it, right? This is sports. This is basketball. Murder is not typically a topic of discussion. So what impact does this have on the team?
I mean, could you imagine being in that locker room? And the thing about an Alabama basketball team, a top 2 team with a guy like Brandon Miller who's projected to go top 5. What does that mean generally? It means that there are a lot of questions being asked around the program, a lot of people falling around, there are a lot of eyeballs on the program. Now it's in a different kind of context, right? We saw this with New Mexico State University. I don't know if you remember that with Mike Peake. He was a basketball player there. There was involved in an altercation that left Brandis Travis dead, and Mike Peake was removed from the team, much like Darius Miles was. The difference is, in this situation, obviously Brandon Miller, as of right now, is not a suspect. He did not pull the trigger, none of that. But look at the New Mexico State program right now. It's canceled because I think after having so much eyeballs on that program, a few months later, a basketball player went to the authorities and said, look, there's been hazing going on. And then that led to the chancellor just canceling the program, suspending the season with 5 games left. I don't think that's going to happen with Alabama, but you could assume that, a former teammate was involved with a murder. It has a capital murder charge on him. Another teammate is a suspect who's, being labeled as a cooperative witness right now. And there's an ongoing investigation, but what else is going to come out as more people start asking questions and more eyeballs are on this program, especially going into March Madness?
Quickly, let's pick it up there. We are heading into March Madness. Let's speak here. Brandon Miller's a top player, so we expect him at this point to keep playing, and this is a top team, could be a top seed, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's the number 2. Yeah. They've been right at the top all year long, and that's what I mean is this moment, you're talking about strictly basketball, and it's really, like I said, it's really unfortunate for us to talk about sports at this moment, considering that there's a young woman dead, right? But the reality is, going into March Madness, I believe this is going to bring up, unearth other things around this program. And the way that the program has handled it, I understand that they're trying their best to be sensitive, but Coach Nate Oates' comments have not been sensitive. And with I don't know if you saw his pat down, Brandon Miller's pat down celebration that he's been doing all season long, but to do that after, there's an ongoing police investigation. It doesn't seem like Alabama understands the context that they're in right now, operating.
And we should know the family of the victim spoke with USA Today. They've called the school's decision to have him keep playing unimaginable at this point. So obviously there's a lot of controversy surrounding this decision. All right, Corey, thanks so much for joining us this morning. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. And the Mississippi State Legislature is at odds over a bill creating a separate court system in Jackson, the state's capital. Under the bill, court officials would be appointed by state officials instead of elected by residents. And nearly a fourth of Jackson would be under state control instead of city control. It's the most recent example in a long history of clashes between the city of Jackson and the state of Mississippi.
A new Mississippi bill is fueling controversy and protest in the state's capital. The bill is aimed at crime, the state facing a higher homicide rate than any state in the country, according to 2020 CDC data, with Jackson's homicide rate increasing 66% from 2017 to 2020, according to policy group Empower Mississippi. On Thursday, controversial elements of the bill were scrapped in the state Senate, but tensions remain. State Democrats initially calling HB 1020 racist and unconstitutional. The original State House bill expands an 8.6 square mile district in Jackson known as the Capital Complex Improvement District, or CCID, growing to over 26 square miles within the city. It also created a new court system in the district where officials would be permanently appointed by state officials and not elected by Jackson residents. And the bill moved jurisdiction from the city of Jackson's police department to the state's Capitol Police.
It's taking power away from Jackson residents, but it's really kind of creating a city within a city.
State Representative Ronnie Crudup Jr. adding the proposal may have had to do with race.
Jackson's 85% black, but a lot of our more affluent and white residents were included in this expansion of the CCID.
The House bill's author, Representative John Thomas Trey Lamar, denies allegations redistricting was due to race.
All I'm interested in is helping make the capital city of the state of Mississippi safer. That's it.
The House bill now amended in the Senate by State Senator Bryce Wiggins.
Nobody, white, black, green, or blue, will tell you there's not a crime problem in Jackson. We've got to get a hand. They and us have got to get a handle on it.
His updated bill reverses the district expansion, eliminates the proposed new core system, and requires state and city police to reach an understanding together or go back to the drawing board.
Capitol Police have always had jurisdiction over the state capitol. What the Senate bill does is extend jurisdiction of the Capitol Police Department to all of the city of Jackson, and to work via a memorandum with the Jackson Police Department to figure out the nuances and how that works.
If the bill passes, Wiggins says the state House and Senate must come to an agreement before it reaches the governor's desk.
And it's important to add that we have reached out to Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves for comment, but have not yet heard back.
Now to the controversy surrounding the creator of the popular comic strip Dilbert. Newspapers around the U.S. are dropping the comic following controversial comments the creator Scott Adams made in a recent podcast. NBC News correspondent Emily Aketa has more on the fallout.
Splashed across newspapers for decades, Dilbert, the syndicated comic strip, has long poked fun at workplace culture, even briefly hitting TV screens.
Are we sticking with our ban on useless greetings?
Yes.
Just checking.
But this weekend, hundreds of newspapers are wiping the cartoon from their pages after Dilbert's creator labeled black people a hate group during a rant on his show, Real Coffee with Scott Adams.
The best advice I would give to white people is to get the hell away from black people. I'm going to back off from being helpful to black America because it doesn't seem like it pays off.
Adams was reacting to a recent poll that found 26% of black respondents disagreed with the statement, "It's okay to be white," a commonly used phrase in the white supremacist movement and since labeled a hate slogan by the Anti-Defamation League. The company that syndicates Dilbert said it was disturbed by Adams' personal views. And now a growing list of major publications are no longer running the comic, denouncing the 65-year-old's comments as racist and discriminatory. The Cleveland Plain Dealer wrote, "It was not a difficult decision. We are not a home for those who espouse racism."
Just how sweeping do you think the fallout will be?
I'm waiting to see. Newspapers have an opportunity right now to show who they want to talk to in this country, who they feel should be represented in this country.
While reckoning with the rapid fallout and follow-up live stream, Adams accused the media of taking his comments out of context.
The context is far too many black Americans have a negative opinion of white Americans.
This isn't the first time a newspaper has pulled the plug on his work, but even the cartoonist admits a comeback from this controversy is hard to draw up.
My reputation for the rest of my life is destroyed.
Emily Ikeda, NBC News.
We're back with a look at how one school in Philadelphia is helping empower students of color by providing teachers who look like them. Through the work of 4 black male teachers, MLK High School is overcoming challenges schools face when it comes to recruiting and retaining black male educators. NBC News correspondent Rahima Ellis has the story.
Together, these 4 men are a rare sight in the nation's public schools, where only a small fraction of educators are black men.
I teach 9th grade English.
Freshman Algebra 1.
African American history.
Environmental science.
They teach the core freshman subjects.
All right.
How did it happen? Working with administrators, they created a team at Martin Luther King High that doesn't exist in any other Philadelphia public school.
I'm called to do this.
As a black man, you're called to do this?
Yeah, in this specific time, in this specific day, this is what I'm called to do.
Eric Butler shares that calling with Denzel Fleming and 2 childhood friends, Marcellus Chisholm and Michael Fleming.
Take out your activity worksheet or goal.
Their common goal, to provide an image that's more than academic in a school that's predominantly black male students.
A lot of our students don't have a male physical present figure in their life. And I know that in our 9th grade academy, they have close proximity to not just 1, not 2, not 3, but 4. We put on many hats for our students. I knew that we're psychiatrists, we're psychologists, we're big brothers, we're mentors, we're uncle.
Students call it a privilege.
Kind of like having a group of dads. I feel like us black students can relate to our black teachers more than other teachers.
I believe that connection with those teachers, it helps me perform better in class.
Do you see a change in your students?
Oh, absolutely. Our kids are invested more. They say, you know what, I'm gonna try harder. I have kids who were not showing up at school, coming to school regularly now.
It didn't happen overnight, so it's like an everyday process. Some of them, they push back, which is, they're teenagers, right? So some of them push back, some of them take the challenge, but they all gonna get their expectations raised.
That's right.
The look on the faces of all of you, it's almost like the Amen Corner going on over here.
I wish I could see either of them.
Studies show having one black teacher could decrease a black child's chance of dropping out.
It does motivate me to see another man like me teaching a class. It shows that I can actually do something in life.
A lesson that resonates deeply here at MLK High School.
I believe coming to Martin Luther King High School, many of our students forgot to dream. And coming together, we're reminding them that it's okay to dream again. We're here to help guide them to that place where they should be or want to be. Good job, excellent.
Rahima Ellis, NBC News, Philadelphia.
Now to our financial headlines. Twitter has made an unexpected new round of layoffs this weekend.
NBC's Savannah Hanout joins us with that and other money news. Savannah, good morning.
Hey guys, good morning. Yes, so Twitter conducted another round of layoffs over the weekend, according to various sources. And while the scope of the cuts is unclear, sites like Platformer and The Verge report they included the head of Twitter's payments group, Esther Crawford, who oversaw the launch of the Twitter Blue verification subscription plan. It also appears that most of the remaining members of Twitter's product team have been let go. Union Pacific plans to replace CEO Lance Fritz later this year. The company making the announcement yesterday after a hedge fund that owns a $1.6 billion stake in the railroad operator went public with concerns about his leadership. In a letter, the fund says Union Pacific has lagged behind its peers during Fritz's 8-year tenure and change is overdue. Union Pacific's board says it's been working with a leadership consultant to identify the best candidates for the job. Apple's highly anticipated mixed reality headset may not need an iPhone to function, either for setup or use. Bloomberg reports Apple is expected to unveil the headset at or around its annual Worldwide Developers Conference in June. Previous devices like the Apple Watch originally required an iPhone for setup. This headset will be able to download users' data directly from iCloud, guys.
Welcome back. The SAG Awards were handed out, and the night's big winner, Everything Everywhere All at Once. The cast won the Screen Actor Guild's top prize, Best Film Ensemble. The sci-fi film also scored awards for lead actress Michelle Yeoh and supporting actors Ke-Huy Quan and Jamie Lee Curtis. Yeoh also made history with her win as the first Asian woman to win the SAG Award for lead actor. The other big winners of the night included The White Lotus, Abbott Elementary, and Yellowstone. Bottom line, SAG Awards are a really good predictor of the Oscars, especially when it comes to the acting category. So things are looking pretty good for Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Love it. I mean, my fingers are crossed for Abbott Elementary, so I'll be watching that. Thank you, Joe. Yeah. And finally, this hour, it was the opportunity of a lifetime for a group of dancing grannies during this year's Mardi Gras festivities in New Orleans. As MSNBC anchor Jose Diaz-Balart shows us, dancing is also a great healer.
For the famous Milwaukee dancing grannies, visit to New Orleans was the trip of a lifetime.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Milwaukee dancing grannies!
A chance to perform in one of the city's Mardi Gras parades.
Oh, they were amazing.
But for Jan Kwiatkowski and the rest of the group, it was about so much more.
Jan, what was it like to be in New Orleans for Mardi Gras?
It was the probably absolute most amazing, profound, exciting, life-giving thing that not only myself, but all of us have done.
She says the celebration was also a time of healing. That's because in November 2021, 3 of their members and a dancer's husband were killed, along with 2 other people, during the Waukesha Christmas parade, when a man driving an SUV intentionally plowed through the crowds.
In that senseless, horrible tragedy, it's how do you all as a group go forward?
The reality is you don't heal unless you're healing in community.
Community they found in the New Orleans dance group called the 610 Stompers. They call themselves extraordinary men with extraordinary moves. And they invited the grannies to Mardi Gras as a sign of solidarity.
I cannot begin to tell you how much that means to all of us.
Why can't we just come together and try to heal? And
Stompers Chris Seckinger and Brett Patron just knew their city would welcome them with open arms.
I'm going to tell you that right now. They were hard to handle.
But they were so much fun.
The 2 dance groups, now forever friends, with joyful memories they'll never forget.
It was just such a tangible way of saying, you're not alone. That meant a lot. I can't even put into words. I'm going to cry now how much that meant.
That was Jose Diaz-Balart reporting, and the grannies hope to have the 610 Stompers join them in a parade sometime this year back in Wisconsin.
That would be good to see. I remember the 610 Stompers. They were in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade a few years ago, and they stole the show. I remember who are these folks?
And now we know.
And now we know. And now they're doing some good in the community, which is great to see. Also, I've never been to Mardi Gras.
I have.
You have?
It's so fun. Beads everywhere. Yeah. Everywhere. I still have my beads.
All right.
It's that fun. So I hope people have enjoyed.
Yes, exactly. That does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.